Hello, welcome to WLOO CATV's Resident Artist Series. Today we are fortunate enough to have with us local native and graphic artist Ty Springer. Now, Ty went through the Waterloo High School, graduated in 2015, and was awarded the WLOO CATV Scholarship for graduating seniors pursuing a career in the media arts. Ty received a number of other scholarships as well, and they were admitted to the prestigious School of the Art Institute of Chicago to study art and graphic design, starting out with fashion. To me, the most striking thing about Ty's art is the outstanding use of body language to communicate the figure's state of mind. Doesn't matter whether you can see the face of the figures, and often the face is obscured or turned away. But whatever the character is thinking about or doing, or in the middle of doing, is caught by the body language, the posture. To me, this shows a very keenly observant eye, and also indicates this is a person who spends a great deal of time observing the world around them. Would you say that's true? Has your art been influenced by what you've seen around you?
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to, especially when you're making comics like I like to do, look at people around you and get a feel for like how they naturally move and react to things. Because in comics you don't get the vocal intonation or you don't get all of the little subtle cues that convey emotion, convey like state of being. So having to really push the pose and having to push facial expressions as well really helps you get across that feeling that you're going for.
Something that impressed me a great deal is even your animal figures, your animal drawings. It's as though the animal was caught as a snapshot in the middle of doing something. Did you observe a lot of wildlife?
So I tend to do my drawings of wildlife either just kind of live, like I've gone to the Henry Vilas Zoo and just tried to quickly sketch whatever the animal's doing at that moment. Otherwise, I use a lot of reference images. For example, in my possum print, I used a reference image of a possum and then altered it to fit what the image needed to be.
Did you go for lots of walks, looking at wild creatures in the area? Or?
Not especially. I tend to do most of my observations through just finding reference images online, because I feel like it can give me a bit more diversity, and it's just harder to find, especially things like I tend to draw like raccoons and possums. It's hard to get them to sit still for a portrait.
Sure, I understand. Yeah, they're always doing something. Something that I ask every artist on this program, and I'll ask you, is did your interest in the arts get encouraged when you were growing up? Did you feel as though you were supported in your interests in the arts?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I always had access to sketchbooks and craft supplies. I remember being 8, 9 years old and going to my sister's softball games and having a sketchbook there where I'm just drawing either my own characters or what I see around me. And then from a young age too, I learned how to sew, for example, helping make my own Halloween costumes, and those two experiences really have helped me form how I do art now.
Speaking of forming how you do art now, how do you feel the curriculum at the Chicago Art Institute, at the Art Institute of Chicago? Sorry, S.A.I.C.
There we go.
How did that education help you develop yourself as an artist? What influences did it have on your art?
So I initially went there for fashion design, as previously stated, And I took one semester of that and learned I hated it. I like doing costume design rather than fashion design. I feel like it gives me more freedom. And because I was at S.A.I.C, I was able to leave the program because they do a interdisciplinary approach, which means you don't have to pick a major. You can pick and choose what fields you go into. So I did a bit of everything from like film and video. I did some video gaming. I did printmaking, comics, art therapy, and all of those have kind of combined together to form how I make my art now.
Did you get exposed to different techniques?
Yeah, actually. I found my favorite thing to use now is the risograph printer. And this is a printer that was invented in the 70s that prints one color at a time. And it uses a soy-based ink, so it's more environmentally friendly. And it creates this really cool blending and layering effect. And now I use it for basically all of my prints that I don't hand carve block print.
So you'd say that going to the school was good for your artistic development?
Absolutely. Like, I feel like it really helped me figure out what I want to be making and how I want to be making it.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of your education with us, Ty. And now let's take a retrospective look at all of your work.
Sounds
and go
good.
through the gallery of your art. Please
All right.
join us as we visit Ty's exhibits and take an online tour. First of all, I'd like to mention the interesting tagline for Hyacinth Studios, which is Art with an Affinity for the Queer and Questionable. Now, I like that title in part because what is queer and questionable anyway? I mean, isn't that in the eye of the beholder? What did you mean when you decided to use that?
So, while it is very much in the eye of the beholder, I do feel there is a cultural expectation for those things. And as somebody who's very openly both trans and pansexual, queer is a word that I have gotten very familiar with and very comfortable with. And so that also lines into the questionable, in that there are a lot of things about my work and my themes that tend to be not typical of what is expected societally. A lot of people would not think to make a possum holding a Molotov cocktail. That is not normally something that is something that I feel societally would be considered questionable, but for me is something that is both comforting and just kind of funny.
Yes.
So yeah, because I do tend to work in this style and subject matter that tends to push on boundaries. So I've found that queer and questionable tends to sum that up the most accurately.
Sum it up. So we know what we can expect.
Yes.
So there are a number of really interesting figures to me on your gallery here. And one of them is a little being you call cryptids. Could Could you tell us about cryptids, please?
So cryptids are a type of folk creature. For example, in my two older prints, the Karl Marx print and the Mothman print, both of those draw reference from cryptids. The Karl Marx print is just literally Karl Marx's head on video footage of the most famous video footage of Bigfoot that has ever been captured. And Mothman is another famous cryptid from West Virginia, although he has relatively recently been sighted in Chicago. These are basically modern folk characters, folk monsters, and so stuff like Mothman and Bigfoot, or even more locally, the Hodag, for example, in Rhinelander. These are all folk myths that have really kicked off since about the 50s is when there was a big explosion in them. And so they're also playing with that kind of idea of things that are on the margins of society rather than being a literal thing. It's this very weird mythological representation.
And you have this display of all these little ghost-like looking figures.
Yes.
Are those cryptids too, or something else?
So ghosts can fall within the spectrum of cryptids, as cryptids are really just mythological creatures to an extent. Cryptids tends to refer specifically to ones in the Americas that have, again, grown in popularity since the 1950s, 1920s. Basically the advent of mass media. But the ghosts are kind of a separate interest of mine in that I just have always been obsessed with ghosts and ghost hunting. Like, I was watching Ghost Hunters when I was 10. I was staying up till midnight watching them. And so I like to play with these sort of macabre symbolism and just make it cute, make it fun, make it accessible. And so, the ghost stickers are really just me playing with that and playing with a lot of the imagery that I'm drawn to and making it into something fun and cute.
And so these are actually stickers that you make.
Yes, I make them on the risograph printer. So I'm printing them, again, one color at a time. So they get this cool layering effect, and I get to use my beloved fluorescent pink. But the interesting thing with risograph ink is that it never dries. It is a soy-based ink, so it is always a little wet and sitting on the paper and can smudge. So these stickers present an interesting challenge of how to make them last and not get rubbed off. And so for me, this has translated into hand laminating them with contact paper.
Oh my.
And hand cutting them out one by one.
That is a labor of love.
Yes.
It is definitely a labor of love.
Yes.
But it works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It turns out really fun, and it allows me to play with like this medium that wouldn't normally last as long.
Mm-hmm. But you found a way to do it.
Yeah.
And make it last. A lot of manual dexterity in your work.
Oh, yes.
Interesting mixture.
I also, just for some reason, my brain has not wrapped itself around using an X-Acto knife, so I use a scissors to hand cut these.
Huh. Okay.
And that is not necessarily the most efficient tool for the job.
But it's the one that you use.
Yes, it's the one that works for me. And I feel like that's a lot of how my art process has become, is like, it may not be the most efficient way of doing it, but it gets the effect I want.
And that is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why your zine is entitled "I See Ghosts in This Town." It's this theme of the ghosts that kind of winds through your pieces.
Yeah, ghosts are definitely something I'm interested in various ways, both as this thing that can be made cute and made familiar, and also as a representation of lingering memory and lingering trauma. And so in the comic, for example, a lot of the use of ghosts is in how people in small towns tend to ignore problems and just pretend like they aren't happening. And that's kind of what the ghost represents in the story,
Huh.
as it is following the main character throughout his day. He's just going out and about. He's hanging out with his friend by the river. He goes to a pizza place. He goes to the bar, and at all these places, that lingering ghost is following him and constantly reminding him of what he had saw and remained quiet about.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I really like ghosts as a metaphor for things.
That's really fascinating. I like that.
Thank
I'm
you.
not going to think about them the same way now. Um, we've already talked about your crocheting, but your online work also references fabric art of other kinds. And you have one picture showing swatches of uncarded wool.
Yes. Let me pull that up for a second. Where are we? This one.
Yes, that one.
Yes. So, another one of my fun little pandemic crafts was getting into both felting and drop spindle. So I have learned how to turn loose wool into yarn, basically, with the intention of one day getting to a point where I can just make my own garments wholesale, from just spinning the yarn to weaving it to cutting and sewing it. And I found that fiber arts are really good as this tactile way of just making something physical.
There's one of your pieces that you have in your gallery showing, it looks like it's food, some kind of a sandwich.
Yes. So that was another piece I
Right
had
there, yes.
Yes, this is a piece I had done just as like a homework assignment. It was to make a bunch of little pieces of needle felted something. It could have been anything, and I decided it would be cute to do a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich.
There it is.
So that is all done with wool, painstakingly stabbed together over and over and over until the fibers lock together and make a solid piece of felt.
That's how that's done.
Yes.
I always wondered when I would see that, how do they do that?
Yeah, it is a barbed sort of needle with like cutouts in it that catches different fibers and locks them together.
Huh.
Because wool fibers have almost scales on them, and so they can lock together to make a tighter fabric, and that's how felt is made. It is either through this needle process or by getting it covered in like hot water and just beating the ever-living crap out of it. That is honestly the more painstaking process than stabbing it thousands of times.
I believe it. Something that I've mentioned and we've mentioned already a few times is the use of animals in your art, but you also use more kind of cartoon characters. You have the Thunder Boys in your art here, the Thundermen, I think.
Oh, yes! So that is a specific fan art reference to some characters from the Dungeons & Dragons podcast, The Adventure Zone. Because that is one of my favorite things to do, is just character design. I play Dungeons & Dragons in real life, and one of the things I do every time I play is draw the party. I will draw my character, my friends' characters, random NPCs, just any character design I can do, I take the opportunity.
Wow, you have a lucky crew. And then does everyone get to have their pictures?
Yeah, so I definitely am like very big about sending folks the pictures I draw of like their original characters, and I will always send it to them and get their input and be like, okay, so what do you think your character looks like? Are they human? Do they have dark hair? Are they tall? These things, which has really prepared me for doing commission work.
Yes. So that would be something that you could do.
Yeah,
as a commission.
Right. That's something that I am really passionate about, that I just love to take these ideas that people have and make them real.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really love this image here a lot. I also like the image that you use as kind of the header to Hyacinth Studios, which is someone wearing what almost looks like either a space helmet or a welder's mask with the thumbs up.
Yes, him.
Yes. Yes.
So that's another theme that I like to play with my work. As you had mentioned before, I put more of the emphasis on the body language than on the facial language.
Mm-hmm.
And this has come forth in this character of mine called the Spaceman. So yes, that is an astronaut's helmet. The idea is basically he is someone who the original concept for the character was more of a former criminal who is just hiding his identity. But this would also explore the ideas of what identity is.
Mm-hmm.
And now he has become kind of my mascot and evolved into now being a character with a hyacinth flower for the face rather than a spacesuit. Just to kind of represent that side a bit more.
Yes, I've seen that image too.
Mm-hmm.
And you have another graphic with the spaceman,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think we have it out on the. Well, we have
yes.
it on the table. It's not that visible.
Yeah,
But it's also shown on your
Mm-hmm.
Hyacinth Studios Instagram site. I think that's a very beautiful image, and it reminds me of so many things. For me, at least, the emotions it brings up in me is that of being alone at night, sitting at a bus stop.
So that piece is actually based on the experience of taking the Amtrak to and from Chicago. When I wanted to visit home while I was at college. So the background for it is a photo I took of the empty Amtrak station at Union Station in Chicago. And then the character is sort of representing just that disconnect with the space, but also that comfort within it. And is sort of just encapsulating that feeling of, like you said, being alone at a station at night.
And there's a trail of stars.
Yeah. I really like the use in sci-fi medium of the idea of like space stations being like train stations or being like docks in ships like Star Trek tends to do with Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that aspect of combining the futurism with something we are very familiar with.
And it shows up very well in that.
Thank you.
I'm really, really liking it. So you have this online presence,
Mm-hmm.
and you also have some characters here that we haven't really talked much about at all so far. And you have characters that are mutilated in some way.
Oh.
And they look so nonchalant about it.
This piece? Or?
Right, yes. There's the lady with the mushrooms.
Yes. That one was also a more loose fan art experiment, and she has kind of taken on her own life as this woman who's just accepted this sort of fungal growth on her. I really like playing with horror imagery, as kind of referenced in both the BFA piece and in my comic. I find horror to be just this very interesting genre to work within, and honestly, I consume media in. I'm a huge horror movie fan.
Huh.
And so there's something very fun too and very powerful about taking someone and having them fully embrace the horror and fully let themselves become the horror. Especially as, again, a marginalized person, you start to internalize this message that there is something almost monstrous about you. And I feel like that is something very fun to play with in a more literal sense of these characters that have just kind of accepted that, yeah, I look creepy, I have this weird messed up thing happening, but it just is.
Yeah, her expression is almost serene, and her body language is completely relaxed.
Yeah.
And yet there are these fungal growths, like you said. So So that's very interesting to me. There are a few others where there are like pieces cut out of the fingers.
Mhm. Yes.
There we go.
These
Yes.
pieces.
Yes.
So yeah, that was actually for a drawing challenge prompt called Goretober. In October, it is doing a different illustration every day. This one was about different horror imagery. So, for example, this piece was about amputation, and I decided to play with the mix of creepy and beautiful, and this idea of just what would that look like? How could I make that an interesting graphic piece?
You mentioned a drawing challenge, and I've seen
Mhm.
sometimes on your Instagram account you'll be responding to a drawing
Mhm.
challenge. What is that?
So, drawing challenges are different ways to explore new ways of drawing. They can be anything from here's a list of ideas, let's see what your interpretation of them is, to take this piece that I have drawn and do it in your style. I've done a couple of those where I've taken various art pieces that folks I went to college with or just artists online that I really respect have drawn and seen what makes my art different than theirs. It's also just a very good way to give myself something to focus on when I want to practice on different elements of my art. I have actually created my own drawing challenge where it's rolling up different creature designs using a D20 because, again, I am a Dungeons and Dragons nerd.
Sure.
I have made these charts where it's like, where is this animal from? Is it a mammal? Is it a fish? Is it some other weird type like a robot? What does it eat? How does it perceive the world? Stuff like this. And then I just roll it and let randomness decide what I draw. And that's a good way for me to get out of my own head and just make something when I am not feeling inspired or have a lot of motivation to draw.
It's a prompt.
Yes.
So you mentioned online artists. Are there sort of networks or groups of artists that do these challenges together? Or?
Yes. Especially the Draw This in Your Style challenge, where you do an illustration and then you say, hey, random people on Instagram, draw my art again. It's actually a really good way of building like community and building connections with people because you get to see everyone's different interpretations on these prompts or on this image. And it can be really cool to see how other people view the world.
It is. I agree. And speaking of building community, things like that, you have spent some years now organizing various art and fine art and fantasy events, such as live action role playing for one, and Pink Apocalypse is another. And how does all that work? What a massive organizational challenge that would be, especially for the live action role play.
So the live action role play is very fortunate in that I am not the only one organizing it. I am merely a supporting character in that. The group I do, Last Hope, they actually have a whole like staff team where my main job is writing new non-playable characters or NPCs. And so a lot of my organizational skills for that tend to be focused on how can I make my own character interesting and how can I make the event fun for other people.
Now, I think you have a photograph of yourself on this site where you have a costume that you made.
Yes. Here it is.
Right there.
Yes, this is a jacket I made for a competition actually online to make a historical costume piece based on a novel. And so I had chosen the Witcher books specifically the character of Dandelion, or Jaskier, as he is called in the original text. And I wanted to take that costuming and make it as historically accurate as I could. And now this is a piece that I will wear at LARP events, and it is something that has been a very interesting challenge, figuring out how to combine different patterns, how to make my own pattern to an extent, and what the historical aesthetics were. I find that that's something I really, really enjoy in costuming and in sewing, is taking historical imagery and recreating it.
So let's talk about the piece behind us.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned to me earlier that this was your culminating final project piece. Is that right, for your BFA?
Yes. So the BFA show is optional to seniors, but I decided to be ambitious and make a piece for it, because I figured I might as well take advantage of this opportunity to show in a gallery in downtown Chicago. And so this is the piece that I had put together for it. It took a lot of late nights in the studio, hand crocheting, hand painting. A lot of effort went into this as sort of that final representation of my art as I graduated.
If we could, I'd like to get up and move away so that we can let the viewers focus in on this piece.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And how would you like to introduce us and help us understand this piece? Would you prefer to talk about the figures or read the poem first?
Let's kind of like read the poem. The piece is called Sometimes I See Ghosts. And the poem says, I'm driving alone at night. I'm flanked by fields, endless corn. It's dizzying. They lack emotion. The road is trapped by the corn. I see... Give me a second, let me restart.
No worries.
Sorry, I have not read this piece in so long.
That's what editing is for.
Okay. I'm driving alone at night. I'm flanked by fields, endless corn. It's dizzying. They lack emotion. The road is trapped by the corn. I see the shine out the corner of my eye, eyes hunting me. I make it home. The lights feel safe, a false refuge from whatever the cornfields hide. And so a lot of that stems from late nights driving home off of like Highway 19 between Lake Mills and Waterloo. There's nothing there. It is just fields. And that can really build this sense of anxiety that something is there. You never can know when you're seeing corn taller than you, taller than the tallest person you know. You never know what's in there. And I think that's a very deep fear that a lot of folks have experienced growing up in this area.
And I'm noticing these figures here, and they look crocheted.
Yeah. So that was actually my pandemic craft. So I graduated college December of 2020, and in that time period between the beginning of the year and going back to in-person college, I spent my time staying at my grandma's. And it was there that I just decided out of the blue one day, I want to learn how to crochet. And that kind of became a way that I could make the shapes that I wanted. I found that like with crochet, I was able to take the forms that I have in my head and make them real.
Yeah, I myself have never seen 3D crocheting before, and it's wonderful. Can you explain to us what each of these figures are about?
So each figure kind of represents like a folk icon associated with the Midwest. So this man is a priest. He kind of is representative of the religious aspects of growing up in small towns in the Midwest. Especially since like when we were kids, a game we would play is bars or churches. as to which there are more of in whatever small town we are driving through.
Oh, I know that game.
Yes. And so like that is definitely a mental image that comes to mind when I think about like these small towns. And then the next one is a hunter. He draws on a lot of the imageries of hunters in like the 1800s when you're in your 4th grade class learning about the history of Wisconsin. You think of the beaver trappers and the hunters that sort of tame the wilderness here. And so I wanted to represent that with this character. And then the final one is a farmer. She is meant to represent both kind of like women's work in the home and also that farming had played such a role in how the Midwest is now viewed. It is viewed as corn and dairy and soybeans and generally nothing else. And so I took both this tension with the poem and these very recognizable folk characters to kind of question the idea of like how much control we have over the environment that we are currently living in.
Wow. And could you tell us where you got this beautiful quilt?
So I actually got it just at a thrift store. It was very important to me that I had a found piece, because it also like brings back that feeling of nostalgia. Like I feel like everyone's grandma had a blanket like this. Mm-hmm. And to me, like the quilt is this representation of comfort and craftiness and something very handmade and safe. And I feel like that contrasts very well with the themes painted on it in red paint, which also has its own implications.
Yes, it does. It absolutely does. A false refuge.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for
Of course.
sharing and interpreting this piece.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, what have you done since you graduated? And do you have other pieces from your final moments at the school?
Yes, I do. So since graduating, I've really put a lot of my focus into printmaking. Mm-hmm. I do have some pieces that I started going into really my senior and junior year of college. I got into what's called risograph printing. It is a risograph printing is using this printer that was invented in the 70s, and it prints one color at a time, similar to silk screening.
Yes.
I've used that on pieces I have over here. The Imagine If Karl Marx Was Real is one of my risograph prints that I did in college and have since brought or continued to reprint because it just brings me joy. But the use of the risograph allowed me to play with the use of the risograph allowed me to play with the screen tone and layering of inks just to get different effects and give it that kind of vintage feel. Mm-hmm. I also printed my comic, Sometimes I See Ghosts in This Town, using the risograph. That piece was a lot more complicated as it was another final piece for a class. I had decided to print it in 4 colors, which means printing one layer at a time and making sure they're all lined up.
Registration.
Yes, it is a process.
Yes, yes. A long time ago I did some of that, and yes,
and
I understand.
That is why when I do more analog pieces, I try to limit my color palette now, because I've found, 1, that's easier to register, and 2, it can be very striking. Mm-hmm.
So is Tubular Mothman over there also
yes,
a
he
risograph?
is. So he is actually not a risograph.
Oh.
He is what's called an offset print,
Okay.
which is kind of like how newspapers are printed. They are still printed sort of one color at a time, but that multicolor background is done by doing what's called a split fountain. And that means on the ink roller, they do green and then blue and then red. And they kind of blend together as it rolls back and forth. So every print is unique and has this different effect. You typically see it in like music posters from the 70s, that kind of red, green, blue.
Sure.
Or not red, green, blue. Red, green, yellow.
Yes, yes. Now I know where they came from.
Yeah.
And it does create a really neat effect, and no two posters are the same. So,
Yeah, that's the difference between each individual item is something I really like about printmaking. That's why all of my pieces since have either been risograph or done with block printing, which is a hand-cut piece of rubber or linoleum, and then I print it by hand onto the paper. It is a process, but it looks really cool.
It does look really cool. And didn't you post a short video on TikTok
Yes.
of how that works, and
Mhm.
and the roller, and they have the linoleum block cut?
Yeah, it's definitely a fun process to watch, and can be really relaxing and satisfying. Just going through the motions and seeing how the variance in pressure and ink coverage, how that changes the look and the feel of each piece.
Now, you mentioned that some of these pieces over here are pieces that you have done since graduating.
Yes, the first piece of mine that I really started making for my post-college print practice was the Become Ungovernable Possum. He stemmed from me wanting to experiment with lino cuts and experiment with this sort of block printing process. And the possums are one of my favorite animals. I love the little guys. They are so misunderstood.
Yes, they are.
And so they are something I'm very drawn to as someone who struggles in a lot of those areas socially and such. I have found that possums are an animal that I like to represent in my work a lot.
So it's sort of has personal meaning, personal
Yeah.
symbolism to you.
They've sort of become like a mascot for me and my brand.
And become ungovernable. And what is the possum carrying in its mouth?
He is carrying a Molotov cocktail.
Got it. Right next to become ungovernable, we have the first Pride was a riot,
Yes.
with the raccoon holding a rainbow flag.
Mm-hmm. That is mostly reminding folks that other queer folks and people who are supportive of the LGBT community that Pride is not meant to be this commercialized thing. It is meant to be this active resistance against being oppressed and being seen as less than, which is another reason why I use like the raccoon as well. I have called this series my trash animals series because possums and raccoons, and I have another print that I'm designing that features a crow. These are all animals that are seen as sort of varmints, basically. They are animals that you shoo away, that you don't want, that get in your trash, that are just seen as problems and nuisances, but they have such an important ecological niche. Like possums, for example, don't carry rabies and eat ticks, which any animal that eats ticks is amazing in my book. And so I like to use these for this more political messaging as a way of saying, hey, these animals have value, so do people who aren't necessarily seen as valuable in society.
It's a wonderful message.
Mm-hmm.
Good for you.
Thank you.
And over here,
So over here is more of my recent risograph prints. With that, I like to really, again, play with color and layering. And these tend to be my less heavy pieces and more of just celebrating. I tend to celebrate just love of all forms I've found in these prints. From just two very masculine cowboys kissing, which is not an image you necessarily think about when you think about LGBT folks, to just the simple joy in my latest piece, Girls' Night, which is on the stand there. that piece is more about just the joy of chatting with someone who gets you. It's just supposed to be fun and colorful and entertaining.
And there's that body language again.
Yeah.
I can't even remember how many nights I would be in a posture like that, talking to my bestie on the phone. So, and you totally catch that with the postures. Very observant.
Well, that's where like a lot of my comics background comes in. I've learned a lot about posing and character acting as a way of conveying story. And that's, I think, something that really, like, studying comics and making my own comics has really helped me work towards.
I think it's partly how you see the world, though.
Yeah.
That you're acutely conscious of people's paraverbal
Right.
communication, the cues,
Yeah.
the movements.
I feel like because I have some social deficits, I have had to overcompensate and learn those physical cues even more. And so they become something that's always on my mind.
Part of how you perceive.
Yeah.
And you share it with your art. Okay, and here's the two possums kissing that you mentioned earlier.
So it's a possum and a
love this.
raccoon.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is.
It is just, again, that sort of show of solidarity, that just two cute trash animals showing affection for each other. And it's just one of the pieces that I've made with the intention of making people smile. Because that's the thing, like, there is a place for very heavy art that talks about serious stuff, but I think there's also a very important place for art that just celebrates joy. And that's kind of what that piece is for.
It's a very happy piece. And the big pink heart in the background.
It's also just, I love using the fluorescent pink on the risograph machine. It is if you notice, it is in all three of the pieces that I have recently done. It is just such a fun color to really bring, like, just this pop to a piece.
So here's one of your most recent pieces. How old would you say this piece is?
3 days?
3 days.
Or so? Yeah.
It's a powerful figure. Can you tell us about what's going on with this?
So this figure is a representation of a character that is associated with the Cthulhu mythos, H.P. Lovecraft's horror stories. Technically predates it, but Lovecraft took a lot of inspiration from this character, and it's now very associated with him. It is called the King in Yellow, which is the titular character of a fictional play that drives people insane. And really plays into the themes of eldritch horror, of things beyond our understanding.
What is the significance of the upraised hand with the sparkles?
So cosmic horror is typically associated with space and vastness, and this idea of the cosmos not caring about insignificant humans. And so that's kind of representative of that, this sort of like being part of the cosmos. They're meant to be depicted as stars.
It's beautiful. I see the moon in the background there and the curtains. So it reminds me of theater.
Yeah.
You know, enter stage right.
And that's mainly because the main driving force for this character is this play that drives one insane.
Got it.
And that is why I've drawn a lot of inspiration from the theatrics and the velvet curtains and this imagery associated with like opening night and Broadway.
I really like it.
Thank you.
This is incredible. Is this piece going to be featured in anything, or is it part of a grand plan, or did you just randomly decide to draw this?
So I've been playing a tabletop RPG called Call of Cthulhu, and this is one of the characters that kind of goes into inspiration for those games. And it's also part of a narrative and a world that I've always been fascinated in. This sort of idea of horrors that are beyond human comprehension. And so this piece is really just me visualizing these characters and visualizing what is not meant to be perceived. Ideally, he will end up becoming a print of some sort so that other people can have eldritch horrors in their homes. But really, right now, it's just playing around with visualizing these horrific characters.
So this might be the ushering in of a new phase.
Yeah, I
in
think
your art, maybe.
Right. No, I definitely want to make more art about these kind of horrors and this kind of exploration of concepts.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next.
All right, thank you.
This is wonderful. So part of, or probably even a big part of your work with print and your lithographs, your risographs, has been networking and getting involved in events with others that do similar art. And one of those events is the Madison Print and Resist, which just finished. Could you share with the viewers more about Madison Print and Resist?
So Madison Print and Resist is a art festival that has gone on for 20 years now, that features print and zine artists in the Madison area. It's very much meant to showcase this very independent DIY artistry and give a platform for local artists, especially ones with more radical pieces.
Okay, and so it's been going on for 20 years, and you've been involved in it for several of those years?
So this was actually my second year. Last year was my first year tabling there, selling my art, and it actually ended up being my first event ever where I'm just sitting there selling my art to others. But it was such a good experience that this year when my boss at Artworking, who is one of the co-organizers of Print and Resist every year now, asked me, hey, would you like to represent our group and help with the organization? I immediately was like, yes, please. I loved it. It was great. I want to be involved again. And so I got the opportunity to do archival research, actually, since this was the 20th anniversary.
Sure.
I helped do archival research into different posters and different press events and different photos from the previous years. And this all culminated in a zine and a gallery show that cataloged the show through the years.
Wow. And I understand that you're planning another event.
So yes, my current project is this gallery show that I am putting together that will be in Madison in February, called Sound Mind, Sound Body. This gallery show is built around the idea of the intersection between mental health and disability. Since I work with folks with disabilities on a daily basis, I see a lot of how that impacts their work. And as somebody who's disabled and deals with mental health struggles, I also have seen how it has translated into my own work. And so I wanted to put together a gallery show that really gave folks who typically wouldn't have the opportunity to share their work because of the accessibility barriers or just the lack of opportunity. I wanted to give those folks a chance to share art about their lived experiences and share with others how these experiences have impacted them.
So that's who you work for, is it's called Artworking. And as I understand it, it's a nonprofit organization intended to help entrepreneurs and artists with disabilities develop and promote their own artwork. How is that done? Could you take us through a typical day on the job, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, that is the fun thing about the job, is I feel like there very much isn't a typical day. The closest thing to that would be these folks will come in based on their schedule. Some folks only come in one day a week. Some folks come in every day. there's a range from being there for 2 hours to being there for 6. And folks will come in. We have a bunch of art supplies. We have papers, canvases, paints, all sorts of fine arts materials to work with. We have a screen printing lab, and we have a laser cutter. We have all of these tools, and my job as an artist mentor is to help facilitate folks in what they want to make. So I will be working with an artist who says, I have this drawing, I want to screen print it onto tote bags. And I will help her through the process of, okay, we take this drawing and we put it in the computer so that we can print it and then put it on a screen. And here now we have the screen, and we will work together to pull the ink and put it on the tote bag. It's very artist directed. The folks that I'm working with, I'm not going in there and saying, hey, you are going to make this now. You are going to make a painting of a landscape. It's very much so, the folks come in and they say, I want to make this, how can I do it? And I found that to be a really cool opportunity for a lot of these folks, because I feel like in the world of disability, most people are expected to be working at like Goodwill or as a janitor. And this really gives folks this opportunity to have the same kind of goals and dreams as other people, where they can make art and make money from it and do something they genuinely enjoy rather than just a job.
Now, Artworking has its own website, as I understand, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll show that to the viewers as part of this episode. And so how do these people sell their artwork then? Does Madison Artworking help with that?
Yeah, so we have a store in our studio. We have a studio space on Stoughton Road, just off of there. And in that, the front room is just products. It's just stuff that folks have made, stuff for sale. We have a whole wall that's just canvases that people have painted on. And then on the website, there's also an online store where anyone throughout America can order stuff and get it sent to them. And then finally, the other way that Artworking markets folks' art is by going to events like Print and Resist. That's part of how Artworking started to help organize that, was that they had participated and sold people's work there in the past, and as a nonprofit, they have a lot of experience working with event organizing and the minutia that goes into it. So they have gotten very involved in working with other community organizations.
It sounds like a wonderful organization. Well, I think we've talked about everything that you have done so far.
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the viewers?
Not that I can think of right now. I'm always making new stuff, so there's always going to be something new to see, something new to talk about. I primarily do that online, but yeah, I'm always happy to discuss my art.
Please look at the links that we have available at the end of our show to sign in, log in, and watch Ty's career unfold. Ty is very young and has many, many years ahead of interesting art and interesting adventures in the art world. And that's about it for us today. I want to thank you for joining us at WLOO CATV's Resident Artist Series. And as always, if you or someone you know is very, very serious about their art and would like to share it, please contact us at WLOOCATV@gmail.com. We'd love to have you on the show. Thank you, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Hey viewers, we want to take this moment to politely ask to hit that like and subscribe button. WLOO is a non-profit organization, and the simple support of taking the moment to like and subscribe helps the algorithm, so our content can reach a broader audience. To learn more about how you can become involved, you can reach us at WLOO@gmail.com. This has been a WLOO CATV production.